All right, well, we'll get started here. I'm sure we'll have a couple other people coming in, but welcome everyone. My name is Troy Beaver with HalenHardy. Appreciate everyone attending Karen's webinar on the top 10 secondary containment violations today. It's going to be another great webinar that she's put together. Just a few things before she gets started, just some housekeeping stuff, quick introduction, and then we'll get right into it. So from a housekeeping perspective, if you guys have any questions at all throughout the webinar, please feel free to just throw those into the chat. And at the end, we'll read through the questions, try to get you answers immediately on here if we can. And if there are any questions that we don't immediately have the answers to, we'll make sure to do a follow-up after the webinar. With that said, I just want to do a quick introduction. I know we have a lot of people on here for the first time that may not know anything about HalenHardy in general. HalenHardy, we're based out of Bellwood, Pennsylvania. We are a manufacturer, developer of various different types of products in the oil spill cleanup and stormwater filtration area. Main mission is to help companies simplify spill and sediment control. We focus in four core areas, one being spill cleanup and containment in the outdoors, and that's anything from land-based spills in wet, rainy conditions to containing and cleaning up spills on water to products for putting under persistent equipment leaks in the outdoors. Second core area is filtering oily sheen from stormwater inside a secondary containment. You'll get a little taste of that today during Karen's webinar. Third is filtering sheen, silt, and sediment from stormwater runoff. That is anywhere around ditches, outfalls, storm drains, developing products to filter various contaminants from your stormwater runoff. And then the final area is secondary containment, mainly in the portable space. So anything from small pop-up containments to put under persistent leaks and drips to drive-in, drive-out berms to put under largest pieces of equipment or vehicles. So with that said, I will hop off here and allow Karen to get into another great webinar.
Thanks, Troy. I did see a question from someone already asking if we will be recording this and sending out later. Yes, we will. This afternoon, we'll send out a link to the recording and also a link to get a certificate. So for anybody who needs credit hours or whatever, we will have a certificate available, and that should be in your email this afternoon. So let's get started with top 10 violations. And this is a topic that we chose because it's something that affects so many different types of industries. It's a topic that is one that comes up quite frequently when we're visiting customers, and they're always looking for new ways to make sure that their secondary containment systems are compliant and they are suitable for whatever they might happen to be containing. So let's look at the top thing. And the number one violation that we see and that inspectors see when they are out in the field are valves being left open. And these are the valves that are taking the accumulated stormwater out of a secondary containment system. This is one that affects small companies and large ones as well. I was visiting a customer in Florida, and they're a very highly recognized company, one that you would all know all the name of, and they've got a dedicated staff of more than 20 environmental professionals who take care of their different facilities and the different things under their scope. And even they have problems with valves being left open, and they ask for solutions to that. And this happens for a lot of different reasons. We see people who really have good intentions, and they go out, the secondary containment system has stormwater in it. They know that it's going to take an hour to drain the entire thing. So they open the valve, they go do something else, and they intend to come back to close it, and it doesn't happen. They might be open to the public, and somebody just knocks that open because they don't know any better. There are a lot of different reasons for those valves being left open, but we do know that it happens, and it's something that quite often is just that factor of human error. People don't intend to leave it open, but it just happens from time to time. So what can we do to keep those valves in the closed position without having to rely on people to do it? One of the things that we have found to be a great benefit for use an oil water separator. And the EPA has actually issued guidance on this. They issued a document called Guidance to Regional Inspectors. Oh gosh, it's been a good while now. But in that, they do have an entire chapter that's dedicated to using oil water separators with secondary containment systems. And these can be systems that are mechanical. So it could be something where you're pumping the water through a physical oil water separator, or they can be a system like our Drainiac system. And this is something that is gravity fed, and it is going to capture any trace amounts of oil that are in a system and allow that clean water to flow through. Nice thing about it is you don't have to rely on that human factor to close that drain when the system has drained out of all the storm water. And also with the oil water separators, you do have that assurance that you're not going to get a violation for releasing any of that oil or petroleum product into the environment. So that's something to consider with that. If you do have that happening a lot at your facility, if you do have maybe somebody who's in charge of draining multiple systems at multiple sites, and they just don't have that opportunity to get back and close all of those valves in a timely manner, this could be a good consideration for those operations and those systems to just add that oil water separator onto all of those valves that are coming out of your secondary containment systems, just so you have that assurance. Now, of course, that's only going to work if you've got oil or petroleum products within the system, but it is, we do find that that's a majority of the cases that many of those tanks and those secondary containment systems are around those petroleum products. So when that's the case, something to consider to help avoid that violation. And again, that is the most common one that we are seeing with secondary containment systems. The next one that inspectors are finding are lack of secondary containment systems for drums, for portable totes, for generators, for all of those things that are in our workspaces that we may not think about. And there's kind of the catch-22 there, because when we think of the secondary containment, we are usually thinking about the big totes, the big tanks, the big stationary things, and we may not consider those small portable drums, those jerry cans, all of those little 5-gallon containers that we have on there. And if we're not subject to SPCC, it may be even more of a thing where it's kind of that gray area. It's a virgin product. I don't think about it. So RCRA doesn't apply. A lot of different reasons for those containers not having that secondary containment. But we know that containers can be hit by forklifts. They can be grazed by vehicles. They can fall over. They can be subject to weather. A lot of great reasons to have that secondary containment around all of those portable containers and tanks. I've mentioned in previous trainings about a facility that was located near a river, and they had a lot of portable containers, mostly drums, that were in their yard. And when a flood came through, they all got washed away. They didn't have a way to keep those containers in their area. They didn't have a secondary containment system, and they did have a very large fine because those containers got loose and did cause pollution into a waterway. So things that you can do there are to look for ways to, number one, keep your containers all in a certain area. So have a staging area for them, have a dedicated area where those containers are supposed to be. And that can really help, because then if you are looking for secondary containment, you only have to put it in one area. You don't have to develop different systems. And for facilities, maybe construction sites or outdoor utilities, places where the number of containers or the number of portable tanks varies a lot, consider portable systems. And portable systems, the nice thing about them is you can take them from job to job, and they allow you to set up secondary containment wherever you are for whatever might need to be contained. So when you're looking at, okay, I'm at the beginning of a job and I've got 50 drums, or I've got 10 pallets of drums, I need to provide containment for those. But then as the construction project rolls on, maybe I don't need such a big system. Maybe I only have 10 drums left. Maybe I get 10 drums a month, whatever that may be. Portable containment systems allow you to really have that option of creating that system that you need right here, right now, without having to put up those permanent barriers. So this helps to prevent you from having to put up those concrete walls or putting in that permanent pad that you might have to put in for a system that's going to be in place for a long time. But when we do have that ability to have that staging area for our containers and for our tanks, and also to have that portable to containment, whether it's a system like the one that's shown in this picture, this is our Hardy berm system, or it could even be a system that you design with earthen materials, whatever that may happen to be. Keeping track and keeping watch over the different containers that you have and knowing where they are allows you to be more compliant with that, because you're going to be able to develop a robust system to keep everything contained. The next is having inadequate containment. Now, I want you to imagine in this picture that these are actually tanks that have liquid product in them. There aren't a lot of great pictures out there that show tank systems with secondary containment. But if these were actually tanks full of product, let's say petroleum tanks, that containment that's around them, that little berm that you see around them, probably wouldn't be sufficient to contain the failure of one of those large tanks or within that containment system. And this is something that we see happening because people have a very large containment area and they've built this really great secondary containment system, and then they'll add on to it. So they'll add another tank, or they'll add more containers, or that's where they'll store different oil containing equipment, whatever those scenarios happen to be. And when we start to add on to an existing system, that's when we start to find that that containment system is inadequate. Another thing that can cause it to be inadequate are the addition of state requirements. So when you look at the federal system, you're looking at containing 100% of largest container or 10% of the total capacity. But when you look at a lot of state regulations, sometimes they require 110% or even 125%. It could also be specific to the product. For example, NFPA requires 110% for secondary containment of flammables. So when we start to look at that, if we haven't done our research, or if we've started to add on to a system, we start to find that we no longer have that capacity that we thought we had when we maybe originally designed that system. And this is something that from time to time when we're auditing our plans or when we're doing internal audits, something that we should really check to make sure that that original spec is still appropriate, that nothing new has come down the system. So this is just something to maintain diligence. So what do we do if there is inadequate containment? How can we fix that? The easiest way, if you've got a system that is a hard system and it's made of concrete, is just to add to those walls. Or perhaps you take a look at what is being stored there and see if you can reduce the number of tanks or the amount that's stored in that area. But this is just something that comes down to engineering. There's no real quick fix there for anybody that does have that inadequate containment. And this is something that they will sit down and do the math on when an inspector comes on site. So it is something to pay attention to, especially if you have a facility that is growing and they do have that varying need, and they do want to add on to that system because there's space there and that's where the rest of the tanks are. Make sure that you're not going to be in violation of having an inadequate containment. The next one is for facilities who have offloading areas, and this is for facilities who are not receiving things in rack transfer areas. Rack transfer areas are typically where petroleum products are being offloaded, maybe from a pipeline or from very large tanks. So this is just, let's say, most often this is happening with facilities that are receiving a tank car of product, whether it's a fuel product or an oil product. It could just be a bulk product of acids or bases or other chemicals that are being used within your facility, but not having general containment for those areas. And remember, within this general containment role kind of started with the SPCC regulations and their requirements to have general and specific containment. So general containment is when you are looking to be able to contain your most common spill. So this is not your worst case scenario. This is not the entire tank car, let's say a fuel delivery. This is not the entire tank car collapsing or failing. This is the hose being taken away from the car for some reason and perhaps having 30 or 40 gallons to deal with. This is so in this area, think about what would most commonly happen versus the worst failure that can happen. And that's what you want to plan for when you're planning for general containment. So when you're looking in these areas for general containment, you're looking at what can I do to keep that spill from getting into drains or getting into sensitive areas, maybe a grassy area or a marshy area or into a retention pond or wherever that might be. And what are you going to do to contain it? Now, the nice thing is that you don't have to have passive containment systems for a general containment requirement either. And what that means is that you can have people activating the general containment system. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to have spill kits available. And those spill kits could be portable. They could be something that the driver carries with them. They could be something that you keep in that loading and offloading area. They could be something that maybe you're keeping in a warehouse. But the catch is, if you're using those for your general containment requirements, they do need to be accessible, and you do need to have people who are able to deploy those things. You could also use berms. So this might be a hard berm or a soft berm that you put out when those deliveries are happening. There are a lot of different ways to do it. Spill kits just happen to be one of the easiest and most common ways to fulfill that need for that general secondary containment without having to put in hard barriers or curbing that is kind of hard for the drivers to deal with when they're coming in and out of that area. The next thing that inspectors are finding are incompatibility of contents. And this is most often happening when people repurpose a container or a tank or some kind of a system for something else, for something new. So perhaps they had a system that was being used for oil, and now they're putting fuel in it. And where you wouldn't necessarily think that compatibility would be an issue because they're both petroleum products, some of the safeguards that may need to be in place for a fuel system are not there because they weren't needed for an oil. Or it's something where they have changed from having a containment system or having a container that was compatible for petroleum products, and now they're using it for something corrosive. So when we are looking at systems that are in place and we're looking at repurposing those, we need to take a little time to make sure that when we are doing that we're not having that issue of having a system that's no longer compatible. And remember that with the secondary containment system, it's not just the container, it's any associated pipelines or any associated hoses that might be with the system. So look at those holistically and look at what's happening not only with the container itself, but anything else that's involved in that system that could fail. And the reason that they're looking at this is because if those things do fail, that's going to create a problem for you. That's going to create that spill or that release into the environment. So most often with changes, typically people aren't putting in a container for the first time and not doing their research, but usually it's happening, as I mentioned, when we are changing from one thing into another. So this would be a good thing to check, especially for people who do batch orders or anybody who's doing that short-term process with something, and they do change things out rapidly. And never assume that just because you've got something that's chemically marketed as chemically resistant, that it's going to be good for everything. For example, stainless steel isn't good with everything, or a lot of the epoxy coatings that we use to line tanks. They're great. They offer excellent chemical resistance, but there's nothing out there. Even Teflon isn't good with everything. So be sure to verify that before you start putting something new into a container. Integrity issues are something that we see a lot with secondary containment because they're systems that we put in place and we don't always think about them. they're there and they're concrete, and you think concrete lasts for a very long time. Even if we epoxy coat it, it's something that we think is going to have this great longevity, but it doesn't mean that we can completely ignore it. And integrity issues are something that, as systems age, and when you think about it, the requirements for secondary containment have been in place for somewhere, depending on the regulation that you're using the secondary containment for, they've been in place for anywhere from 15 to 20-ish years now. And if you've got an old secondary containment system, you may start seeing these integrity issues with that secondary containment system, especially for outdoor units that have been subject to heat and thaw cycles, and those that have not been maintained as often as they should be. So this is something that is great to do in the spring and in the fall before we have the, especially for those in the north, when we have those kind of breaks in the weather after we've been through the stormy seasons and before we hit those cold seasons. Look for any integrity issues, both with the walls and with the floor of your secondary containment systems. So if you do have cracks, fill them, but when you're filling them, make sure that the structural integrity of the unit is still in place, that those cracks aren't significant. If you're in areas with earthquakes, if you're in areas where tornadoes or other natural disasters have come through, those can all cause shifting within your unit, and it's great to check those after any of those events happen to make sure that your systems are still structurally sound. Look for any vegetation that might be growing within any cracks there. So you see a little plant growing in one of the cracks. So this is a system that on the right that has been sealed several times, but you can see the cracks are still kind of coming through. We've got a little vegetation growing. That is something that inspectors can create a violation for. So when you do have those situations, it's time to start looking at them and making sure that we're not just filling that crack, that we're looking for the source of the problem and correcting that as well, so that that system won't fail if a tank fails and if that system is needed to provide that containment for a total volume spill. No inspection records is one that we see not only for secondary containment, but for a lot of different regulations. And this is, it comes down to that simple matter of human error quite often. It's maybe not that we haven't done the inspection, but we just haven't recorded it. And the great news is that with technology being what it is, a lot of those inspections can be automated on our phones, on our tablets. We don't have to keep a paper file anymore. So we're not relying on somebody taking a piece of paper into the field, performing an inspection, and bringing that piece of paper back to put in a file. We can automate a lot of that with technology. And this is something that there are apps available, and some of them are at low cost, some of them are at no cost even. You can even have if you've got a great IT department, perhaps they can create an app for you that allows you to put that inspection record on a digital form that can be filled out and stored electronically. But it's just something that inspectors are still looking for. They are looking for those inspection records. They're looking for that due diligence. They're looking for you to show and to prove that you're doing the things that you said you were going to do in your plan to prevent systems from failing and to prevent pollution into the environment. So look for ways to do that. This is a great project if you've got a vocational technical school within your area. This is a great project for them to help you create an app or create something on tablets or whatever devices you might have for your employees. Great way to involve them and create something that will work for you, that helps you to kind of check that box and make sure that those inspection records are available, they're readily accessible, so that when the inspector asks for them, you've got that proof and you can kind of move on to the next part of the inspection. No written procedures is one that it still surprises me that it comes up on inspection forms from the regulators, because you kind of expect people to have procedures in place and know that they need them. But this is something that we're finding, especially with refuelers and them not having a written procedure, they do this every day, and it's kind of nature or habit to them, and they know that they fill up their tanker, they come to your facility, they offload the product, and they do it the same way every time. They connect the hose, they do this, and they don't think about it. But quite often they're the ones who are found without procedures. And this is one that when I worked at a previous job, I actually found when we had the refueler coming in to refuel one of our fuel tanks. They had no written procedures. And when I was putting together an SPCC plan, I wanted to know that they had those procedures so that I could put it in my plan, and they didn't. So we actually worked together to develop those for the refuelers. So consider anybody like that who may be coming onto your facility who may not have those procedures and how they could affect your operations. And look for ways to do that. And of course, have written procedures for the things that you do for yourself. So looking at product transfers, anytime that you are moving product from one container to another, or from one tank to another, or through a pipeline, what is your process for that? What is your procedure for that? Do people know it? Can they access it? Where can you put that so that it is readily available to them, so that everybody's following the same procedure? When you are draining your secondary containment systems, what's the procedure for that? Do they open all the valves at once? Do they do one at a time? Do they do one a day? What is that? What do those procedures look like? And where are they written down? And also, do those procedures reflect current reality? Are you still doing things the way they're written in the procedures, or has something changed? And are those procedures out of date? That's something else that isn't really reflected in the scope of the regulation as far as the violations go, but it is something that can get you into trouble as well. If you say that you're going to do A, B, C, and D, but really you're doing E, F, G, and H, that's the same as having a no written procedure because you're not following what you said you were going to. So this is something that should be audited regularly. Look at the processes that you have, look at the operations that you do, and review those from time to time to make sure that, number one, you've got a procedure, number two, it's communicated, and number three, it's accurate and people are following it correctly, so that you do stay in compliance with this and you're not receiving that violation for inaccurate procedures. And lack of maintenance. Lack of maintenance is something that we see from time to time, and it's something that happens very easily, especially through in the spring when it's been a harsh winter. We don't want to send somebody out in the cold to clean out that secondary containment system. We've had some freeze thaw cycles, and the edge of the secondary containment system kind of looks like this one. This is a portable secondary containment system that I happened to see in a parking lot, and it was under a piece of equipment, and it's one that you can see hasn't been cleaned out for a long time. Also, if you're looking at the sidewall of it, you can see that it's kind of breached on the side there. You've got the foam hanging out of it. This is a system that probably needs to be replaced. But within it, under the corner of the vehicle, there are some absorbents that are completely saturated with oil that haven't been changed out and haven't been moved. We've got some pine cones. There on the other end of this picture, there's a soda bottle. So clearly nobody has been doing due diligence with this system. They've let the water go in and out of it. They haven't bothered to take any of that silt and debris out. And the reason that the inspectors look at this is they want to know that people are paying attention to their secondary containment systems. They are looking for these things, and they're cleaning them up just kind of as that good housekeeping practice, just as we would clean up within our facility at the end of the day so that we're ready for the next day's work. Same thing here. Now, of course, they don't expect it to be cleaned out every single day, but it is something that they want to know that it's not being filled with trash, so that when you do have a spill, it's going to be easier to clean that up because you're not dealing with all the debris and junk that happens to have accumulated or blown into or been thrown into a secondary containment system. So have a schedule for that. Have a process in place so that your secondary containment systems are maintained on a regular basis. And this is removing the trash. This could be bringing in a vac truck to clean out the gunk that has accumulated. This could just be having somebody go in there with a trash bag and cleaning out the soda bottles that have gone in. Whatever that means for your facility, have a process and have a time schedule to do that. And of course, when you do have a time schedule, you want to make sure that people are doing it so that you don't get called into question for not following that process as well. And finally, the last of the top 10 is failure to clean up spills and remove stormwater in a timely manner. And this is one that, of course, we see because sometimes we just don't have time to get to everything. But when we do see a spill or we do see a sheet in a secondary containment system, whatever that may be, we do need to clean it up in a timely manner. And timely manner, of course, is open to a lot of interpretation. Basically, for all intents and purposes, it's as soon as you discover it. You don't want to have a spill within a system or a sheen within a secondary containment system and say, oh, you know what, this week isn't convenient. We'll just let it there till next week. It's contained, right? We don't need to do anything. That's not the case. We do need to be diligent about cleaning those things up quickly and having the ability to drain those systems after we've removed the sheen from them, or to pump them out, whatever the case may be, to take care of that situation as soon as it's discovered. Because we all know that the longer that we leave it there, the more ability it has to get into the environment. So having the resources to do that, whatever that might mean for your facility, it could be having vehicles stocked with spill kits. It could be having spill kits available at every secondary containment system. It could be having a vac truck that's able to come and take care of the system quickly and drain it quickly. Whatever that means for your facility, look at different ways that you can be prepared so that when you do have a spill, or even when you do need to have those secondary containment systems drained after rainfall or after snow melts, you have those pieces of the puzzle in place, and you're able to do that quickly and not have that delay and not have that situation staring there waiting to become a bigger problem. So wrapping up, these are the top 10 things. And as I've looked at these over the past 20 years, the list really doesn't change much. So these are things that facilities are getting called into question for and receiving violations for year after year and over 2 decades. I really haven't seen much change to this list. It's kind of like the OSHA top 10. It's something where you see the same things happening again and again. So they are known, and they are things that we can anticipate, and they're things that we can plan for, and things that because we know we can do better to avoid these violations in the future. With this, I'd like to thank you all for your time, and I'll turn it over to Troy in case there are any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. That was great. Again, as I mentioned at the start, I appreciate everyone attending. I'm not seeing any additional questions as of right now. As was mentioned, we will be sending out the recording, and we can also get you certificates of participation with credit hours if needed. So if you do need that, just let us know. We'll be happy to get those put together and sent out to you. And with that, we'll give you 25 minutes back of your day. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you.